phone conference, and we're using technology just to practice good social distancing during this time. So before we get started, I'd like to call the meeting to order, but then do a roll call to ensure we have a quorum. So I know we just checked to see who is on the conference call, but I'll just run through our board members, and if you can state if you're present, that would be great. David Meyer.
Present.
Joe Pankinen.
Present.
Jonathan Ott.
Present.
Teresa Miller.
Present.
Okay. So all board members are present. Again, thank you so much for being here with and attending and for your engagement. Did I miss anybody on the board? I think I covered everybody. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. So with that, today we have some new business. The first item is a COVID-19 situation update from Jill. Then we'll be covering regulations related to COVID-19, and then last we will be taking public input. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill for the situation update.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also mention that Renee Vink and Mike Peckus, our soon-to-be board chairs, are also in the audience just for your situational awareness, Madam Chair. So to start, it was only 2 days ago that you as a board convened, and we did a pretty thorough review of where we're at with coronavirus and COVID-19 in our community. So I'm not going to take too much time, but at that time, it's important to note that we had no community spread in Sioux Falls area. We had some cases in Minnehaha County, but they were travel related. And since that time period, we now have a total of 16 new cases in Minnehaha County, or 16 total cases, 3 of which just occurred today. And then we have 2 cases in Lincoln County, 1 new case today. So it was yesterday that we entered into having community spread in our community, and so extremely timely that you are convening today along with the City Council. I think that really is what I would like to cover at this time. I just want you to know that your Emergency Operations Committee for the city that is dealing with COVID-19 has been working very, very hard and continues every day. Seems to be more and more activity in this area. So I think as far as the situation update, I think that probably covers new items since you last met. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions from the board? Okay. Hearing none, then our next item for today's meeting is to discuss the regulations relating to COVID-19. So we do have adopted proposed regulations that were sent to the board, and I'd like to first ask for a motion to adopt those proposed regulations.
So move.
And a second?
Second. I can second.
Okay, great. And then Jill is here to explain in more detail. Jill, did you want to go through that the amendment that is being proposed as well?
Let's go ahead and I'll talk about, yes, we can talk about the ordinance in general, and then we can talk about.
Great, and then, perfect.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Perfect.
Awesome.
That would be great, thank you.
Great, great. I think to start us off, it would be important for us to hear from Mayor Paul Tenhaken. I think he's in the audience, yep. To kind of kick us off in terms of talking through this ordinance and why we're asking for this today.
All right, good afternoon, board. Thanks for reconvening again. Thanks for joining us remotely as well. I'm just going to give you the kind of bird's eye view of what we're asking you to recommend to our city council, which is going to be meeting at 4 o'clock today. What you have in front of you is a proposed ordinance that would limit gatherings of 10 or fewer in a variety of business categories across our city. It is not essential or non-essential businesses is the categories of business that are outlined in the governor's executive order. And the reason we're taking this step is, other than the obvious, is we feel that this is a very prudent step right now based on the situation we're at in the city of Sioux Falls, based on the fact that we have moved to a confirmed community spread situation in Minnehaha and very likely soon to be in Lincoln County. We're not there yet, Jill, but I believe we had another Lincoln County case just reported today. Is that correct?
Yes, if I were to clarify, we're in substantial community spread in Minnehaha County, and Lincoln County, I believe we're in the minimal to moderate.
Minimal to moderate.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question before us has been all along what authority your board has to take action with the business community in terms of a recommendation to our council. I can tell you that we have studied and researched in a tremendous detail what authority the city of Sioux Falls has, the Board of Health has, the State Department of Health has, the governor's office has, and we are operating to the absolute fullest extent of the law that's available to us. And that's very important because right now, as I mentioned in our press conference this morning, we are trying to balance what I would say is a five-legged stool. And those five legs are dealing with public health, which is primarily obviously COVID right now. But then we're dealing with unemployment in the economy as a result of COVID. We are dealing with housing challenges as a result of COVID, which is a whole nother public health issue. We're dealing with mental health issues as a result of COVID, another public health issue. And we're dealing with food security issues, which is also another public health issue. And so every time we make a step in one direction, we have to realize the ramifications in the other legs of that stool. And so what we're proposing today is to limit gatherings of 10 or fewer in bars, restaurants, casinos, cafes, breweries, entertainment venues, recreational facilities, fitness clubs, and the other list that is in the ordinance in front of you. Our proposal is that that is in place for 2 weeks. The reason we are asking for that for 2 weeks is because it gives us a regular assessment period where we'll be able to look to touch base. I'll tell you, I am very much a realist, and I try to balance that with optimism. And the realist in me says we will be extending this again in 2 weeks. But we do have the option then to determine if we need to lessen that. So people have asked, well, when would this be retracted? When will we take this back? We'll assess based on the increasing amount of data we're getting each day on this topic. And the more data we have, the smarter decisions we'll be able to make. We'll know when we're plateauing, when we're peaking, and where all the critical data points are in COVID spread in our 2-county area here in Sioux Falls. So that's very important. The other thing that's important is that this will be enforceable by law. It will be a Class 2 misdemeanor if businesses cannot abide by this. Class 2 misdemeanor is a $500 fine, up to 30 days in jail, and if you're a business that has a license, your license may be able to be revoked. In the case of a bar, for instance, that would be a liquor license. So there's some teeth to this for people who don't abide by that. This is my recommendation to you as the board, so I also want you to know that you have my backing. If you choose to approve this, I will stand up and support you. And I also strongly hope our city council, if you choose to support it, takes that seriously as well. I want to leave you, I'm going to give you a quote as a board. And this is a quote for anybody who's listening, who's in the leadership position in this role right now, including our city councilors who have a decision to make later today. It says, good leaders during times like these don't allow all the hysteria to control their decision making. They remain optimistic and non-anxious in the way they present themselves to those whom they lead, though they know they will be criticized for not taking the situation seriously enough. Good leaders make what they believe is the best choice for those they lead, even when they know the decision may cause harm, sometimes irreparable harm, to some of those for whom they have responsibility, though they know they will be accused of being heartless. Either way, they will be criticized. Bad leaders are absorbed in the hysteria and make decisions that they think the people want, not concerned about the long-term consequences, but only the short-term approval of the constituency. And that's by a gentleman named Bill Smith. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. It's the situation you find yourselves in today as a board. And so I think we're bringing you a very balanced ordinance here that strikes a very realistic balance between city powers, city law, as well as public safety and balancing that five-legged stool. So thank you for your consideration today. And Jill and our city attorney Stacy will also touch on any gaps that I maybe missed on some of the specifics of the proposed ordinance. So thank you. Actually, should I take any questions from the board before I get down, or how do you run these meetings?
That's a really good question for a meeting like this. I think it would be a good idea if you have any questions for the mayor.
I think so too. Do any board members have questions for Mayor Tenhagen?
No.
Okay. Thank you again for serving.
No. All right.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, is it all right if I continue a little bit here?
Please. Yep, please do. Thank you,
Okay.
Jill.
All right. So really have to give a lot of credit to the city attorney's office for helping us with the guardrails that we need with this, while at the same time also making sure that, we want to maintain consistency with the presidential guidelines around social distancing, the state's executive order, the governor's executive order, as well as CDC guidance in this area. So they've done a great job with that. So you'll see a lot of elements in this that line up with those particular sets of guidance and executive orders. So I'm just going to draw your attention, without going through all the whereases. I'm going to go to under definitions on page 2, and that just to talk through this a little bit. Item 2 under definitions says that enclosed retail business that promotes public gathering or used herein shall mean any enclosed facility operating as a bar, restaurant, brewery, cafe, casino, coffee shop, recreational or athletic facility, health club, or entertainment venue. These are consistent with the governor's executive order that was issued a couple days ago. Such term shall further include any parking lot or patio or outdoor seating area for such facility. So this includes their entire property essentially within the enclosed retail business as a definition. You'll also see that number 3 is patron, and it's defined and shall refer to a customer of the business as defined in subparagraph 2 above, and does not include employees or staff of such business. So this would mean that they can have up to 10 patrons in their establishment for these particular entities under the definition above it, and as well if they have additional employees. So the example we tried to look at was trying to encourage people to still do curbside service, takeout, and drive-through. And so, if they need additional employees, obviously, to manage that, as well as up to 10 on their premises, that is what it would indicate here. So we tried to really make that as much of an option for them to continue those kind of business practices that would really promote decreasing social interaction as possible. So you'll also see that we've identified that there's a number of city-owned properties that will remain closed to the general public, and those have been listed in prior ordinances. I believe, Stacey, there aren't any additional changes to which items business or city venues would be closed. Those are consistent with prior ordinances. I'm going to skip then now to private businesses, and I am going to kind of talk through this a little bit just to make sure you're really understanding this again. And I'm not going to go through what enclosed businesses again, because I have already shared which types of businesses we're talking about. But we are encouraging businesses, as I mentioned, to really consider takeout, delivery, drive-through, curbside service, and off-site services. That's a high priority in this ordinance, is really encouraging all private businesses to manage that. And when I say that, I should go back and clarify. This section is really providing some guidance to those entities that are not being required to limit their to 10 or fewer patrons. Correct, Stacy? This section, private businesses, but rather to give some guidance that's very much in line with the governor's executive order. And so there is a whole paragraph there that you can see of the kinds of, it says the restrictions set forth in paragraph above shall not apply to the following. And so you can see it's healthcare facilities, residential care facilities, congregate care facilities, correctional facilities, child care facilities, businesses that offer food and beverage solely for off-site consumption, including grocery stores, markets, convenience stores, pharmacies, drug stores, and food pantries, and other than the portion of such businesses. And right now, it's the rest of that sentence is a sentence that Stacy will talk through in terms of needing an amendment to that. So just kind of note that in your copies that we'll be coming back to that. This section also shall not apply to, this ordinance shall not apply to hotel, motel, room service, airport concessionaries, crisis shelters, homeless shelters, churches, soup kitchens, or other similar institutions. It shall not apply to traditional golf courses, but but any bar or restaurant associated with a golf course shall abide by the above restrictions. Any emergency facility necessary for response to the current COVID-19 emergency or any other emergency or disaster shall also not apply. But it does say that the businesses and entities identified in this section shall take all reasonable measures to ensure social distancing and sanitation is being utilized as is feasible and comply with federal and state health guidelines in order to prevent the spread of the virus causing COVID-19. And it says such businesses are further encouraged to consider, to the extent applicable and feasible, providing for special access periods for populations particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. So for example, a business, could they possibly, we know of some some businesses that have like opened their doors to the elderly population like a couple hours earlier than the normal public, to respect the fact that they may be at increased risk, and so to allow them to do some shopping at a different time of day. And so we really encourage that to be considered. So going down a little bit further in the ordinance, you can also see that the business entity owner and supervising manager of any business that refuses to comply with these regulations as adopted by ordinance of the City Council shall be deemed in violation of the ordinance. So I think what I want to just convey that there is, in addition, some items that are both for employers that are for-profit, not-profit to consider as far as ways that they can participate in reducing the spread of coronavirus. And then there's also a section that talks about what citizens can do and some guidance towards how they can also reduce the transmission of coronavirus, as well as protect people at high risk in our community. So there's some sections in there that you will see as well. You can also see, and the mayor alluded to this, that this ordinance is written to remain in effect until April 8th, or for 2 weeks, that is, and unless extended, amended, or terminated by ordinance. I think from that section, that pretty much covers, I'd like Stacy to talk a little bit about the amendment, the section that would be recommended to be amended, and then I'd also like him to elaborate just a little bit on the enforcement provisions that are in here as well, if you could, Stacy.
Sure. Madam Chair, good afternoon, and board. Stacy Koistra, City Attorney. I do have an amendment that's expected to be presented here, and I'll explain to you what that is. If you look at the section 3 defined as private businesses, and paragraph 1A subsection Roman numeral 3, that currently reads in the copy in front of you that it ends with that are subject to the requirements of paragraph 5 of these regulations. Why that needs to be amended is the language needs to be clarified in order to state that there are certain businesses within our community that are grocery stores, for example, and markets that do have areas designed and intended for seating. And so the amendment would just ensure that any seating area, any dining area has the same rules as far as the limitations on the limitation on personnel or patrons for social distancing. So the proposed amendment there would be to replace the language referencing paragraph 5 and rather inserting, quote, that are designed and intended for seated on-site consumption. That way, when grocery stores are exempted from this and people are allowed to shop there, that does, in effect, ensure that there's a limitation on dining in those areas. So, and I do have a second minor amendment once we're finished with this one. So, any questions on that from the board or from Director Franken or anyone else? Okay. And so that
no
that
questions. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyone else on the board have any questions for Stacy regarding that amendment?
No.
No.
Madam Chair, would
Stacy,
it
were you
help?
also wanting? Oh, go ahead, Jill.
If you are ready to vote on the amendment, and then if you have any additional, any questions about the main motion, would you like me to read that amendment for you? Would that be
Yeah.
helpful?
Yep, that'd be good.
I could do that, Liz, if you
Sure,
would like.
sure.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. The motion would be to amend by striking from section 3, paragraph 1, subsection A, subsection 3, that are subject to the requirements of paragraph 5 of these regulations, and inserting in its place that are designed and intended for seated on-site consumption. That would be the motion as written.
Thank you, Jill. Do we have a motion for that amendment?
So moved.
Okay, a second?
I'll second.
And a second.
Thank you. Jonathan and Teresa. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign? Okay, motion has, to approve that amendment has passed.
So Liz, we now have one more amendment to discuss, if that's all right.
Yep, and I can discuss this
Sure.
one. Liz, if you look at the definition section of the regulation, and that includes paragraph 1, social distancing, paragraph 2, enclosed retail business that promotes public gathering, and paragraph 3, patron. If you look at that paragraph 3, it states, patron as used herein shall refer to a customer of the business as defined in subparagraph B above. I would suggest that you consider amending that to read paragraph 2 above, rather than subparagraph B, just so that it references the paragraph right above it.
Okay. Thank you. So could we have with that description there, Stacy, could we have a motion to strike letter B from, let's see, section 1, paragraph 3, and insert 2 for that B? Could we get would there be a motion from the board for that amendment?
This is Teresa, and I would make a motion. I would make a motion for that change.
And do we have a second? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to
Was there a
say
question?
the motion should be changed to paragraph 2, not subparagraph 2, right?
Right.
Yes, it says, the copy I have right now says subparagraph B, and rather should reference paragraph 2 above.
I'd like to make that motion that it be changed to paragraph 2 above.
And do we have a second?
This is
I'll
Teresa, and I
second.
will second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay, that motion passes. Thank you.
Liz, this is Teresa, and I have just one other question. Just a question on the front on page 1, and it would be like paragraph 7. I was just curious, will those be updated to reflect the data from today or not? Is that not necessary? So paragraph says, whereas on March 25th, will this be updated to include the March 26th information, or is that not necessary?
That's a great question. Stacy or Jill, would you have any feedback?
I think that given at the time that this was drafted, this was the information we had. I don't think that we would need to amend it to insert today's date of that. I don't know that it would change the intent of the ordinance at this time.
And I can speak to that a little bit too. One of the things, you know, when you look at the due process component of this, and obviously these are important topics, and so we are operating, the city is under a standing emergency declaration from the mayor. But what we are also doing is being mindful of the due process and the notice requirements of city and state law as much as we can. And so what you'll find is that this proposed regulation is drafted 24 hours in advance to put it out to the public so people can have notice of what's being discussed. And so that's what you're going to see anytime that you have that notice being provided. And so that's why it references times from March 25th. I think Director Franken is correct. It's a whereas, it's not substantive when it comes to enforcement. I think it could be amended if somebody wanted to. That being said, those are the numbers that you're going to receive on anything that's noticed ahead of time. There's necessarily a 24-hour difference between the two. So as those numbers get updated today, obviously they change, but that's why the copy you have has the dates that it does. So.
That totally makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa, for the question.
Madam
Any
Chair?
other questions from the board?
And I do have one more comment I just want to touch on, is there was discussion about the time frame for this. That the time frame as far as anything that would remain in effect is something central and identified in the city ordinance. For the purposes of this regulation, as this is, in the event that the board passes this, this would go to the city council. That's where you would see an ordinance into effect for a fixed period of time. So that's why you won't see the language in the regulation that you have in front of you.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Stacy.
I'm happy to take any questions, Madam Chair or board, that you have for myself or Mayor Tenhaken or Stacy.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'll jump in on one more thing. Director Franken, I want to make sure that it gets addressed. She had mentioned any of the enforcement component to this.
Right.
And I'm happy to address that because, again, in the regulation that you have in front of you, that's not referenced here. That's in the purview of the city council. And so when it comes to any type of enforcement component, class 2 misdemeanor, anything of that in that regard, that'll be addressed by the council later today, subject to the Board of Health's approval of what's in front of them this afternoon.
And I think to add to that, it is the intent that we would initiate some level of There's a plan in development around some of the education that we need to do just to make sure people in the community are aware of this, but yet at the same time begin to fully comply with this even yet today. And then how we will ensure this is, in effect and that everyone is complying with it. There's an element around our inspection folks will be managing through this from an inspection and enforcement standpoint, but they've got some things in the works around education as well for the community in general, as well as those impacted businesses.
Got it. Thank you, Jill. And thanks, Stacy, for those that additional information. I will ask just one more time, are there any questions from the board or anything else that we'd need to discuss prior to moving forward with a vote for the entire ordinance? Any questions about the amendments?
Just to clarify,
Okay,
the vote
so
would
now
be
that
on just to clarify, the vote would be on a regulation, not an ordinance.
Sorry, the regulation, so the entire regulation, yes. So if I may, we'll now take a vote on the entire regulation. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay, so the motion to adopt this proposed regulation passes. Okay, so moving on to the next item on our agenda, unless there's any other questions from the board or from Jill or Stacy prior to moving on. Our last agenda item is for public input. And I'm sorry again that I'm not there in person. I'm sure that there are people in the audience that may want to provide public input. So at this time, I'd invite them to the podium, and we do have a 3-minute limit, just understanding that we'd want to allow time for those in attendance to provide their input. So those interested, please approach the podium and state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Starr, Councilor Pat Starr, and the first thing that I wanted to do more than anything else is thank you for your service. The Board of Health, you've met a lot and you've spent a lot of time. Our city staff has done as well. One of my concerns, though, this afternoon is that I don't believe this measure goes far enough. And I was hoping this afternoon that you would have had on your agenda and some time to speak to what is the next step. And where are we and how close are we to making that next step? And one of the things that I'll be proposing at the council meeting tonight, or yet this afternoon, is that we look at how long that we make the effective date. And I'll be looking at a date of April 1st to next Wednesday. As we all know, this is changing rather quickly. In fact, on the drive over here, the president is already in the process of drafting a letter to our state governors saying that we need to relax things, that we need to look at a 3-tiered approach to social distancing, and that we'll all be in church on Easter Sunday. I think we're moving in the opposite direction. That's what we're hearing from our professionals here within the city, and that I think there needs to be some strong leadership that has the next step in place. Meeting at 2 o'clock with the Board of Health and having the City Council meet at 4 o'clock, that's good at getting things done, but it's not good at good public policy. And we need to be further ahead in this. And saying that we're going to let this policy go for 2 weeks with the potential that there may be changes, I don't think it's moving us in the right direction. We have, as a city council, a special meeting scheduled for Tuesday. My belief is that we'll need to take stronger action at that point. And what I want to do is to be able to allow you to have that ability to do that as well. So whatever noticing that we have to do between now and then, I would expect us to be back on Tuesday to say we did the right things or we need to take stronger action.
And to allow us to do that and to schedule that so that we're ready for that, I think is a prudent step. Thank you for your time, and thank you definitely for your service, because as a volunteer group, this probably, of all the city boards we have, this will take your public service to as far as it'll go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Starr. If there's another
Yes, Counselor
member of the
Staley.
public that would,
Counselor Staley's here now. I also echo what Counselor Starr said, to say thank you for your time and your service. And kind of echoing off what the mayor said, I think we're all striving to be good leaders. We're all listening to the different segments of our society. I probably hear different things than the mayor hears, or that another council member hears. But we have to take all of those concerns and bring them together. And of course, our most important concern is the safety and health of our citizens. I did want to say that I was here on Tuesday, and something that some of my colleagues have echoed this, that it's moving forward as we have these discussions, that we have those medical experts here as well. Last week we had the chief medical officers from Sanford and Avera here, and it was so life-giving to have them involved in the conversation. So we've requested that they would be here tonight, and moving forward, we're requesting that a representative from those medical facilities will be here as well. I agree with what Councilor Starr said. I think we need to take this in very small increments and have another review of this in a week as to how this is proceeding. And I had a question, and maybe this is more appropriate for tonight, but I've been asked, how are rummage sales going to be impacted by this? I know there was the Kingswood rummage sale was scheduled. Are we going to have some kind of provision in place for that, or because they'll be starting in April here, people coming out and going about town. So is there some way to include these? Should they be included, or maybe they've already been addressed? Thank you.
thank you, Councilwoman Staley. I don't know that I have the answer regarding your rummage sale question, but perhaps that is a question for the city council meeting. Jill or Stacy, would you have any response to that?
At this time, I know that's a item that is been brought forward, and so just like a number of businesses that are not explicitly provided guidance, but yet have to be looking at how they are practicing social distancing and helping mitigate the spread, they would be included in a business like that that has to look at how they are taking that guidance into consideration. I would consider that to be the type of business that would do that as well, but certainly it's something we're looking at, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can address that as well, and frankly, some of that can build off what the mayor has stated, which is that this doesn't close down any businesses. So I think it's debatable whether a rummage sale is a business. There are different provisions in the law with different exceptions for things like that. But at this point, no one was really exempt from on a lot of different levels, from the social distancing component to it. But there isn't anything that would shut down or threaten rummage sales. There's just a prudence in the duties that go along with the social distancing and that type of thing. So, good question.
Thank you, Jill and Stacy.
Madam Chair, I don't see anyone else coming to the podium.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Well, that does cover our new business for today. So I will, is there a motion to adjourn our meeting for today?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Great. Thank you so much. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same side. Thank you. Thanks everybody for attending, and I appreciate your time and input, and we'll be in touch.